Are you a business owner or entrepreneur who's had great success in the business world, and now you want to launch a speaking career to share your message with the world? If that's you, then listen up. 25-year speaking industry veteran Brett Ridgway has released his latest special report, 3 key things entrepreneurs must master to build a profitable speaking business. To pick up your copy, go to brettridgway.com/freebie. Welcome to the Spotlight on Speaking show with Brett Ridgway, where you'll learn the keys to building a profitable speaking business from speaking industry pros. Each week, we interview a great guest who will share his or her speaking journey, identify what their keys to success have been, and highlight some critical mistakes they've made along the way that you'll want to avoid. Be sure to visit our website at spotlightonspeaking.com. And while you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, sit back, tune in, and get ready to meet this week's guest.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the Spotlight on Speaking show. I'm your host, Brett Ridgway, and today's guest is an event design consultant, executive Zoom producer, and business growth strategy coach, recognized as a networking expert by NPR, Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Inc. He's the award-winning author of 3 books that have collectively received over 550 5-star reviews. On the 3-year anniversary of COVID-19, bringing all in-person events to a screeching halt, he published Breakout of Boredom, Low-Tech Solutions for Highly Engaging Zoom Events, which won a gold award from the Nonfiction Authors Association. He founded the Biz Book Publishing Hub to give entrepreneurs access to the resources they need to become successful authors. He focuses on helping entrepreneurs build launch teams that lead to 50-plus Amazon reviews and a pipeline to the author's services. Since 2016, he has hosted the On the Schmooze podcast, and for 4 years, the hashtag No More Bad Zoom Virtual Happy Hour. Please join me in welcoming all the way from his home in the Philadelphia suburbs, a TEDx speaker and HBR contributor, Robbie Samuels. Robbie, welcome to the Spotlight on Speaking show.
Brett, as a speaker, I want you to follow me around and do that intro wherever I show up. What are you doing next Tuesday? That was amazing. Thank you. And thank you for having me here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, Robbie. So we have some mutual acquaintances, and you've been highly recommended to me more than once that you got to get Robbie on your program. You got to get Robbie on your program. So I'm glad we were able to finally connect. And so this program, Robbie, as I said before we started recording, it's about your speaking journey and all that. So how did you get into speaking in the first place? What was the driving factor that said, Robbie, you need to get up in front of the room and share what you've learned with others to help them out?
When I was 7 years old, I had the opportunity to give my very first public speech at my sister's bat mitzvah. And my mother gave me some prep. She told me to look at 3 points in the room and pick 3 people to look at. And so she gave me a little of that encouragement. When I was 15, I had the opportunity to present in front of some legislators at a legislative breakfast. And again, I got some prep. And so I wasn't afraid to do this. I didn't know how to do it. I wasn't sure I was good at doing it. But it turns out if you're young, people give you a lot of leeway. So I had some opportunities to practice. In college, I ended up getting on a speakers bureau to talk about LGBT issues with residential advisors, the RAs, and other college support staff. And from that, I decided to then start running some of my own trainings. And I did that with a partner for a couple of years. Then there's just like 12-year gap where I do none of that. I'm busy living life, working, and all of that. I started a meetup group in 2006. And the following year, I was talking to people about what it meant for our regulars to be welcoming. So I had regulars together and I said, come a little early, help out at the front door and then just kind of like work the room, schmooze. And they gave me deer in headlights. Well, that led to me creating my first training related to networking. Now, I had been pretty good at networking. I hadn't thought too deeply about it. It was something I was sort of naturally gifted at doing. But when you teach something, you learn a lot more about it. And so I really dove deep into how to create these incredible, engaging experiences at these events. And I discovered that a lot of the folks who were drawn to what I was speaking about felt that they were either introverted and or shy. And so they were looking for strategies that would work for them. So it wasn't about showboating. It wasn't about being in front of the room. It wasn't about raising your hand all the time. And so that is the path that started this. I offered that talk pro bono for a couple of years around town to a few grassroots groups that I was a part of. And then in 2009, I got an opportunity to be paid, but not for that talk. A friend of mine who lived in another state said, I'm on a board of directors. We're meeting in Washington, D.C. There are a group of doctors, and I need them to be trained on how to do fundraising. Robbie, I know you have a job as a fundraiser and that you train people on networking. Will you come to DC and do a talk? And I said, yes. And then I had to create a new talk. I was paid a whopping $200. They paid for also my $200 ticket on my flight, and I had to stay in the room with my friend because they didn't pay for my hotel. And when I billed them $400 with a 50% referral discount. And spent the next year telling people I had talks that I could deliver, and they were $400. And I would waive the fee down to a handshake until a year later, someone said, "Oh, okay." And I thought, "Ooh, I left money on the table because of my fundraising training." So then I said, "Oh, $600." And 6 months later, someone said, "Oh, yeah, okay." And then 800 and 1,000. And then I got kind of stuck at 1,000. This probably took about I would say like 3.5, 4 years, where it kind of grew over time. I stayed at 1,000 longer than I should have because then when I moved from that, it went from 1,200 to 1,500 to 3,000 to 5,000 kind of quickly. What happened is I got better at my delivery. I had more content, and in that time, I left my day job to focus on speaking full time as an entrepreneur, and subsequently launched a podcast. My first book came out, and then I had the ability to sell myself differently because then I was an author. So that kind of brings you up through 2017, and that's the path that I thought that I was on, was teaching people how to network at conferences, and that path got a little disrupted in 2020. But
Yes,
that's
it
where we
did.
start, Brett.
All right, so that prompts a couple questions in my mind. So number one, let's go down that networking path a little bit further. So obviously, one of the keys for speakers to getting more gigs is networking properly. Whether it's
Mhm.
virtual, a virtual meeting like a speaker's playhouse or an in-person Rotary meeting or whatever. So give me your three best tips for networking success for speakers.
Well, I think a lot of us could do a better job looking through and cultivating our existing network. It's an untapped resource. So with the work I do now, both with my coaching clients who are doing business development and the authors that I work with, is helping them discover likely prospects and likely referral partners in their own network. And I have a whole process that's actually outlined in my second book, Small List, Big Results. Launch a successful offer no matter the size of your email list. And if you go to smalllistbigresults.com, you can get the workbook for free. It's just available sitting right there, whether you buy the book or not. But the idea is that you stop thinking small about your network. I think a lot of people think, well, I don't have that many people on my email list. And like, well, your network is bigger than your email list. It always is bigger than your email list. So the first criteria for whether or not to reach out to someone is a two-part question. Would they remember my name? And would I be happy to hear from them out of the blue? And then I have a process of helping you sort of prioritize people based on their connection to you, their influence, depending on what you're trying to do, and their interest in what you're trying to do. But I think speakers could get more bookings if they were clear on who they served and sort of woke up their network to get those referrals and those prospect calls.
All right. So as you were describing the escalation in your own personal speaking fees, that prompts the question to me, do you think that overall speakers tend to undervalue what it is that they bring to the table?
I think that can definitely happen. I think this is where external validation often helps confirm for us that we are on the right track. So if we do the work of not just creating content, but we're also nurturing our network and we're looking for the social proof that we need. And social proof is who's booking us to speak, the clients that are hiring us, we're being quoted, writing a book, having a podcast, being referred by certain people. I mean, that helps us understand the value of what we do. I also think collecting testimonials and holding them someplace where you can review them when you need a little pep talk, because you do good work. And sometimes when we're in the middle of starting something new, maybe a new project, a new talk, we need that reminder. So I think that as a speaker, sometimes we don't quite realize that we're being paid not for the 30 minutes or 90 minutes that we're there, for all that we bring to that moment. And this has been interesting for me because I get paid in a different scale when I'm doing Zoom production and event design, which is more like a coaching uh, package, versus when I'm doing a training or a keynote. And it can mess with your head because one is like all the work is priced for that 1 hour, but no one asks you how much time you spent getting to that hour. And the other one, you're billing people like almost like an attorney, you're like trying to figure out what to bill for. But I do think we should remember we make positive change in people's lives. That's our job.
So you mentioned you did a lot of pro bono gratis speaking early in your career. And that's what I call business building speaking. I honestly think everybody should be a business building speaker at the least. I mean, get out there and talk to your local groups, make people aware of what it is that you bring to the table. But I also classify other couple types of speakers as keynote presenters, which we're all familiar with, and platform selling speakers, multiple speaker events. Somebody makes a pitch at the end of their talk or whatever. Which of those two worlds have you played in, and which do you prefer?
Well, I've been paid to speak, and that was really the goal of my trajectory of my business up until the pandemic, was paid to speak. I was developing some other offers, but they weren't nascent. So I had some coaching packages and things like that. Since the pandemic, I'm much more speak to sell, and it's not that I'm making a pitch at the end. It's that I am sharing information, making the audience aware of the bigger problem that they didn't know they had. So when we are reaching to our prospects, there's a problem that they know they have that they're willing to admit. I call it the little p problem. But if we try to sell them a big solution for the problem, which is the problem that we as the experts know they have, it's a mismatch and they don't want to buy. So as I'm doing presentations or writing articles or whatever messaging I'm creating, it's really to help increase that awareness so people start realizing, oh, there's more to the story. Oh, wait, Robbie seems to know a lot about this. I could try to do this on my own, but I don't want to do it on my own. I want to get it right. I want to get it right now. Well, that makes them an ideal client, or at least an ideal prospect, depending on the urgency they have around the problem. But when they were first thinking about this, they didn't know enough about the big problem to not take action. But when they finally know more about it, now it's whether it's like, what's the cost of inaction? What if you do nothing? And so some of what I'm trying to do now in my talks is just kind of increase people's awareness of that.
So to get to that key moment at the end where you're opening up that bigger problem for them and hoping that they will want to enter into your world, obviously a lot of the success of that goes back to the very beginning of the speech and how you got them involved with you from the get-go. So what are your best tips, Robbie, for how you most quickly can build rapport with an audience?
Well, if we're trying to do something for that spin-off business, and that's really the focus, I think making sure that the focus of the talk and the title and description speaks to that audience, the audience that's aware, like what's they're aware of. And then during the course of that presentation, you start to illustrate and demonstrate and showcase through storytelling, other examples, how much better their life can be if only they knew these other things. And so I think it's about bringing them in. Sometimes I'll do polls to get a sense of who's in the room. I partly do that because I might do the same poll at the end. And now I'm asking them, well, how do you feel now about this? And yes, it's helpful for me to have that pre and post information, but it's actually really helpful for the participant to recognize themselves how they've shifted their comfort around this topic, because then they'll be much more open to investing more time in it. None of us want to go from a deficit to getting better. We would prefer to go from pretty good to much better. So if people feel at the end, well, I'm actually better at this than I thought, but I want to get even better, they're more in line with probably being open to the offers you have, than someone who's like, oh, nope, still hate it. I don't want to do it. It's going to be a much harder hill to climb for them.
So do you still do keynote speaking?
I do presentations on my topics. Like right now, as you mentioned, I'm really focusing on helping entrepreneurs become successful authors. So I now have a talk that's all about why we don't need to be buying bestseller campaigns and how that's just not actually going to change our bank account getting number one bestseller on Amazon, but how we instead should be focusing on reviews. And then I talk about like what I mean by that and reviews from who and how does that then help your business. So I'm basically introducing an idea to an audience that's eager to be successful at being an author, but they are stuck on what that success should look like. And I'm opening them up to another way of measuring success. And if they like my way, then they're going to follow me down a path and want to know more. So that's more of the messaging I'm now doing. During the pandemic, I was doing a ton of presentations around how to use Zoom to create these engaging, transformative, and inclusive online experiences, and eventually wrote a book on that. And so that was really important. Prior to that, I've done lots of talks around how do you build an audience before you're trying to sell anything, which is my content for my second book. And I still get asked and paid well to do talks for my first book, which are about how to show up at an in-person networking event. But I've woven in now information about how to do online networking as well, and even networking within a company. And so I occasionally, because that expertise has the most social proof, because I have the book, I have a TEDx talk, all together. And I've also been interviewed by NPR for that. So it pops up in people's radar, and then they're like ready to pay me to come do a talk from years ago. And of course I say yes.
All right. So when you're getting ready to go into any speaking engagement, whether it's a keynote for an association or corporation, or whether it's a platform selling situation or whatever, one of the biggest things I think speakers are weak on is doing their homework in advance of an event. Who's really in the audience? What are their true pain points? You know, if it's a corporation, who brought me in? Why they bringing me in, etc. So, speak if you would a minute, Robbie, on what homework you think is most critical for a speaker to do prior to any speaking engagement.
Well, understanding the match between you and the audience, this is where meeting with the meeting planner or the host really makes a difference. I tend to focus a lot of my talks lately on membership groups. I think that membership groups have not been like a wide audience compared to, let's say, a podcast, but a deeper audience. So the engagement, people coming on my, joining my email list, opting into my lead magnet, sending me a LinkedIn request. I have found those to be much a higher ratio of people doing that. And I think it's because they're already part of a community. So meeting with the organizer or the host of that space about the needs of the group and better understanding them. I just recently presented at Bay Area Independent Publishers Association and Redwood Writers. And so I learned both of these large writing organizations have a mix of both nonfiction, focusing on business, as well as self-help and travel, and fiction, which is every genre that I haven't mentioned. So my remarks really are geared towards business, but I made sure to kind of insert wherever possible and here's how you might think about this if you have a fiction book. Now,
Right.
I'm not trying to sell to fiction authors, but my process would still work for them. I just don't think that their urgency around reviews is quite as high as someone who's doing business development off of a book. So they're not as good of a prospect, but they could still learn from me. And I have to do the job of translating what I do to the world that they're in order for them to feel good about what I said and feel like I was an effective speaker. Because otherwise, what happens is you'll end up with this really lopsided feedback form where, it did not land with half the audience because you really did not give them any examples or any evidence that you were speaking to them. And that's a mismatch. So it might be understanding who's in the room as far as experience, how many years experience, what pain points people have. When I'm doing my networking talk, I always ask, give me 3 examples of how people might be using networking, because that's such a broad term. And so I find out that they have some conferences that they go to. I find out that they are trying to connect with people across the company who live in other regions of the world, and that they're also trying to figure out how to get mentors. And then I ask, can I meet with 2 people in your organization, one who's kind of newer to your organization, and someone who's been around a while and is well connected. And so we'll schedule a quick chat and I'll just ask them what they've done. And that helps me understand the tools the company is using. So I don't want to talk about using Slack and if they're using a Teams channel approach, right? Like I don't want to use the wrong language because it takes them out of the story when I do that. And if I say, oh, you want to connect with people in the book lovers book club discussion on Slack, and they don't have anything like that. Well, why not? I'm always kind of like, really, because I've talked to some organizations where like they're all business in their channels, I'm like, like there's no pets, no Halloween photos, nothing, and then like, well, it does make it a lot harder if you can't connect on a personal level. Like I'm sort of acknowledging to the individuals that that's true. Whether they can make the change or not is this is where if I wanted to be consultants, I could do more work with that, but I'm not trying to change the culture. I'm trying to work within it in order to help them leverage the networking possibilities. So in that case, meeting with just even a couple of people can help. Plus the person who booked me usually gives me enough information to craft the message in a stronger way.
Oh, very good. So I have a couple other questions for you, Robbie, but before we do, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsor.
Are you a business owner or entrepreneur who's had great success in the business world, and now you want to launch a speaking career to share your message with the world? If that's you, then listen up. 25-year speaking industry veteran Brett Ridgway has released his latest special report, 3 Key Things Entrepreneurs Must Master to Build a Profitable Speaking Business. To pick up your copy, go to brettridgway.com/freebie.
And we are back with the Spotlight on the Speaking Show and my guest, Robbie Samuels. So my favorite question always to ask my guest, Robbie, you've probably heard it if you listen to any other episodes, is, all right, it's time to bare your soul here a little bit. Share an embarrassing moment from your speaking career where you screwed up, left you a little bit red-faced, but a valuable lesson was learned, and it would be something you would highly advise other speakers not to do.
I showed up at a conference to do a presentation. It was supposed to be, I think 45 minutes in a small room, like a breakout session, and something changed the schedule and it got chunked down to 30 minutes. I probably had 3 hours of content to start with, and I was already struggling to pare it down to 45 minutes. I just talked really, really fast, really, really fast. I did not have a modular approach at the time to my presentation. And I also didn't have a clear sense of what piece of my presentation was of greatest importance to get people to a specific transformation. And I didn't have a book yet. And once I got a book, it actually helped me both clarify some of those points, and it eased my speaker brain because I could say things like, well, here's a quick example, and there's more of that in my book, but let me move on. And that way I didn't have to walk them through every exercise I knew, because I'm like, oh, you can go find all that in my bonus content, in my book, that kind of thing. And that helped, but I didn't have that. And I just I can't even tell you. I'm a fast talker to start with. I was at like triple speed, and I don't know what they took away from it, but it didn't feel good at the end for me. And I didn't. There wasn't time. I think if I'd come up with a 15-minute version of my talk and let people have questions, that would have been a better use of my time, or their time even.
So how do you measure the success of a speech?
I love when people fill out my Talkadot. Are you familiar with Talkadot.com? This is a great tool for speakers, designed by a speaker. It is a way to deliver your lead magnet, freebie, bonus content, but also collect a little bit of data. And it's very slick looking. They give you a screen that you can drop into your PowerPoint. There's a link if you're virtual, you can drop in chat. So either QR code or a link, and it walks them very quickly through a series of questions. Several of them are more of like definitely very much or definitely not at all kind of range of questions. So was it engaging, informative, interesting, interactive? Those are really quick, but there's some open-ended spots, and there's also an opportunity for people to say, I'm a prospect. I'm interested in whether they're hot or cool, or I have an idea for where you could speak, either a hot or cool lead for you. And then it automates a quick message to the people who say that, to say, oh, hey, let me know more about that. And then you get like information in the database afterwards. So it delivers to them whatever that freebie is, which could be your slides. But I love that I get to quickly get a quick story from them about how it hit. And then people who reach out on LinkedIn and connect with me and join my programs, like that's the ultimate success, is when there's more revenue in your bank account. But if I can get people sort of more drawn in and part of the conversation, that's a plus.
So let's talk virtual for just a second, Robbie. So what recommendation do you have for speakers as to things they need to do differently or better or whatever in a virtual situation versus an in-person event?
Brett, we don't have enough time. There's so much. All right, I'll give you my top tip, which is look at the camera. It's free. It does not cost you anything. You can put something behind your screen to kind of draw your eye there. You can put googly eyes above your camera lens to remind you to look there, tape a photo, whatever it is. But even when you're getting interviewed on a live on LinkedIn, and I watch these lives and everyone's staring down, there's a disconnect in how I want people to be looking at me. Like, you want this to be as close to TV as possible. And for TV, they're not staring down at the screen, they're looking at the camera. You have a full box here to work in. It's more cinematic than it is theatrical. So we have to modulate our voice. We have to do a mix of sharing your screen, but not staying stuck on your screens. You have to not hide behind them. You have to turn them off occasionally, speak directly to the camera, put them back up. It really comes down to really thoughtful design, which is like people coming in, whether it's in person or virtual, are coming in thinking, feeling, and doing one thing. At the end of your time together, you want them to be thinking, feeling, and doing another thing. Well, that's the transformation. These are the objectives. So what do you design to help them move there? And if you design in a modular fashion with a clear sense of which pieces are of greater importance to reaching those end goals, if you need to reduce or lengthen the amount of time, you know how to do that with ease. You're not stressed out about it. And then you have to also understand facilitation skills, which are different on virtual than in person, because in person, we know who's speaking next because there's body language of people raising their hand, or you go around a circle. And so for virtual, you have to come up with the rules for that moment of how we're going to engage around questions, or if we're all doing a check-in, what's the order going to be? And so there are ways to use the platform to help you do that, but it's understanding the facilitation piece. And the last piece is understanding the platform. So you're using all the tools of the platform really, really well. And that's my last book is focused on all of this. It's a manual to walk people through how to leverage using Zoom and other tools, because it's not just about Zoom, it's about theory of strategy, not just the tools of Zoom. But I will say there are 10,000 words in this book about how to use breakout rooms effectively. So there's a lot for us to learn about.
Bottom line, just go get the book is the bottom line.
Breakoutofboredom.com. You can get all the bonus content, again, whether you buy the book or not, but I recommend getting it. And it will absolutely change the way you approach not just virtual, but again, a lot of these questions could be applied because there's a Venn diagram that overlaps these two spheres. That I think is quite a bit of overlap. There's some things that only have to be thought of in person and some things only in the virtual space. But good facilitators can train up quickly in virtual if they're trying to get better at it.
All right. So as we wind down this episode, I think it's been an outstanding interview. Thank you, Robbie. I want you to give you a couple minutes to tell people a little bit more about what all it is that you do and how they can get involved in your world if they so choose.
Well, I'm really proud to say that my podcast, On the Schmooze, has been around for over 8 years, and it is being rebranded the Biz Book Publishing Hub podcast. And every week, I'm going to be sharing 2 episodes. One will be an interview with an expert who helps entrepreneurs become successful authors through writing, editing, publishing, or marketing their book. The other is a panel of authors talking about the ROI of publishing a business book. These have been very frank conversations, so much to learn, things you wouldn't think to ask about, strategies and tips and hacks. It's a wonderful community. And through the Biz Book Publishing Hub, I also host 6 times a year a free virtual networking event for writers and authors to connect with each other and these hub partners, these experts. At the bizbookpublishinghub.com, you'll find more than 50 hub partners who are ready to guide you through this process. Personally, I am focused, as you mentioned in the intro, on the launch piece. I feel like a lot of people who write a book get through the publication process, and then if they jump further, they jump right into marketing and paying for PR, and in between is a launch plan. So let's help you build a really strong sales page for your book on Amazon by getting 50 or more Amazon reviews, and by building a pipeline of prospects and referral partners that will help you grow your bank account.
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you so much, Robbie, for being my guest on this episode. Well worth the time. I hope everybody listens to this one twice. But as always, I wish you, Robbie, the best of success in all that you do. And to all the listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us today. And as always, may this year be your best year yet. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
This has been the Spotlight on Speaking show with Brett Ridgway. Be sure to join us every week as we interview speaking industry pros and have them share their best tips for building a profitable speaking business. Until next week, thank you for tuning in, and remember to visit our website at spotlightonspeaking.com so you can enjoy even more great episodes like this one. While you're here, be sure to subscribe via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Spotlight on Speaking show. Until then, our sincere best wishes to you for the greatest of success as you work to build your own profitable speaking business.